Let's bring you into the conversation we were just having, Brenden, about Richaun Holmes and kind of how this Kings roster got loaded with so many big men. We were trying to pick apart exactly what Monty McNair is doing as a general manager, and it left us asking the question: Do you think Monty McNair thought Richaun Holmes was going to be back here this year?
It doesn't seem like it. The roster construction around that doesn't make much sense if he did assume that Richaun Holmes was going to be back. It doesn't make sense to have Holmes swap out DeLon Wright for, I think if you were looking to swap him because you thought you had too many guards, you would have went and got some sort of wing player. Instead, they went and acquired Tristan Thompson, who hasn't done much on this team, partially because of the depth that they've had. No, I mean, from just reading the surroundings, it doesn't seem like he thought that Holmes was going to be back, which would have made this just look all way worse than it already does, by the way.
Yeah, I'd argue Tristan Thompson's made more headlines than anyone else in a Kings uniform, but that's just
that's a fact.
Me.
But so now I'm asking you to get inside ahead of Monty McNair and get inside of his heart when that's unfair. But do you think he wanted him back?
I mean, I would think that you'd have to want Holmes back. Like with the impact that he had last year, it was such a massive drop off going from Holmes to the other centers on the roster. And you look at the two most played lineups, Holmes was a major factor in those. I mean, I'd be shocked if he didn't want Holmes back. My guess would be that like most of us, I just didn't think Holmes was going to accept the max deal that Sacramento could offer. And that's what ended up happening.
You're listening to D-Lo and KC on ESPN 1320 KIFM West Sacramento, KRXQ HD2 Sacramento and Odyssey Station, and driven by Lashers, Elk Grove Dodge, Damian Barley, and Kenny Caraway, along with Brenden Nunes of the Kings Herald and the Sacramento Bee. Brenden, you wrote a great piece that appeared in the Sacramento Bee yesterday, and a rare pro De'Aaron Fox article. I love a lot of things. I love a lot of what you said, but there's one thing that particularly stood out to me, and it's this constant conversation we've had this year about De'Aaron Fox or Tyrese Halliburton. And you had a line in there, and forgive me for paraphrasing a little bit, but it's like good players, great players, they've got to learn how to play together. Like it's not one guy solo anymore. Like guys have to learn how to play together, and that's kind of where we've always sat is Fox and Tyrese have to figure this out. Like what prompted you to write that on De'Aaron?
It really was countering a lot of what I was surprised to see of this whole, like, they have to move on from Fox this year. And just the certainty of that take, I think, is what kind of drove me to that. But, you know, I'm not saying that for sure that Fox and Halliburton work well together, that those guys optimize each other. But I think it's way too early to know and call that when they've played 80-some games together, which I get is an okay sample size. But to me, it's not enough. Like, we didn't think that Tyrese was capable of what he's shown us this year. We've seen games like that one against Atlanta where they're both able to come through. I think that you need to have multiple playmakers. Like, you look at what's going on with Dallas and Luka. They're talking about they need another playmaker alongside Luka. You hear similar things with Trae Young. Like, I think that you need multiple playmakers. And the only way that we know that this pairing works is if you actually take the time to try to complement and build around them and figure out guys that are going to not only complement their strengths, but hide their weaknesses of defense. And we've seen poor defensive backcourts work before. I guess maybe you could say they're outlier circumstances, but if you look at Portland a few years ago, they made it work with lengthy wing defenders, which ironically is Mo Harkless, and then Al-Farouq Aminu. You look at Denver making it work with Jamal Murray and Will Barton because they have Aaron Gordon and Paul Millsap. Like, I just don't think that we can say this duo does not work until you actually try to get surrounding pieces that are going to complement those guys. Like, good players need other good players. If they were to ship off Fox and try to get younger, which I don't hate that idea, you would need another Fox caliber player or better alongside Tyrese, or else Tyrese is looking at a similar situation you've seen with Fox over the last couple of years. So good players need other good players. And it's just crazy to me that right as Fox gets what's probably the best teammate of his career, which is crazy to think about. Tyrese is probably the best teammate Fox has had in his career. That right as he gets that, it's like, all right, now we got to move on.
So let me play devil's advocate just a little bit here. When you bring up teams like Portland is where it really stood out, where I really want to ask this question. But Denver as well, I think they fit the same category of what I'm going to ask. Can Fox and Halliburton be as good as those backcourts? Right now, I'm beyond. I like both. I love both of them. I think they're talented. I don't know if they're going to be as good as Dame and CJ. Like, they're able to get away with that because these are, at one point we were like, yo, this is one of the best backcourts outside of Steph and Clay in the game. Like, they were that good. Can Tyrese and De'Aaron be that good? Not just good, that good.
I mean, I think that they could be, and they need another guy. Like Portland has Nurkic and Denver has Jokic. I mean, those guys are in different spheres, but those are both borderline all-star caliber talents. When you're talking Nurkic, the low end, and then obviously Jokic is what he is. Mm-hmm. So I think that they need more guys as well, but I think it's too early to say that they can't be. Like De'Aaron averaged 25 and 7 last year. There's 7 dudes that were 23 or younger to have ever put up that stat line. And it's like Oscar Robertson, Tiny Archibald, Derrick Rose, Luka Doncic, Trae Young, and LeBron James. Like, I think it's easy to forget De'Aaron Fox is a really damn good basketball player. And we've seen what Tyrese has been capable of recently. I don't know, kind of blowing off any sort of ceiling that I potentially had for him, where I think both of those guys are all-star caliber players. So I think that it's possible. Again, I'm not like trying to preach that they will work together, but I just think that they can. It's just going to take surrounding pieces, and it will take one other guy that is a borderline all-star, a little bit below, but like that's just what the NBA is. And I think that it's too early to trade away one of those guys when, to me, the answer should be getting another one.
Why do you think Brenden Nunes of the Kings Herald in Sacramento be with us here on ESPN 1320? Why do you think De'Aaron's been so inconsistent this year?
That's a hard one. I think that, I don't know, the beginning of the year was rough and unexplainable. Like the beginning of the year was pretty bad for De'Aaron. But I think that coming back from COVID could have affected him. I know the last 2 games he's had that shoulder issue that he's kind of written off, but Gentry, said something along the lines of, well, you've seen him. He didn't look the same as he did in those previous 330 game performances. But I think it's just, it's hard for me to really fault De'Aaron for that because like Holmes wasn't giving good effort at the beginning of the year. Freaking Richaun Holmes, the guy who is nonstop effort. Harrison Barnes, like I think I get that Fox should be the outlier and the leader of this team that doesn't have this, but every single player has looked deflated, defeated, and it's just like I don't know how. It's hard for me to expect Fox to be consistent in these sort of circumstances. There's constantly a player on the floor alongside him that defenses do not care about from the perimeter. Chimezie Metu, Marvin Bagley, Maurice Harkless, and then also the big man. He's being asked to like shoulder the load of a offense that's trying to make up for a team that's giving up 115 every single night. So kind of went off base from your question there, but I don't exactly know. But it's hard for me to completely fault him when you're seeing it with all these other circumstances. He went through a coaching change this year. I do think there's an aspect of learning how to play with the first player he's ever had that is also another really good passer. Halliburton's the first teammate he's had that's averaged more than 4 assists per game. Like the next guy was the next best passer he had was probably Bogey, and Bogey never hit that 4 per game. Like I think that's an adjustment. So I think it's just unideal circumstances and then adjusting to Halliburton and a coaching change. And yeah, I get that. Like I'd prefer obviously that Fox is the leader when it comes to energy and consistency. But at the same time, I don't think that like, because he's not that guy, that he's not worthy of a max contract. Like there's max guys around the league that are number 2 options.
You think they can turn this season around, Brenden?
I think that they need to. I think that it depends what your definition of that is. Like, I think that they could win the play-in, but I think that it's going to take actually trading away first rounders. Like, they haven't traded away a first round pick since they've drafted Fox. And if you're going to have all this talk about you want to win games, then act like it. I think that they can, but it would take a significant move. Like, Vucevic was acquired for Wendell Carter, and I want to say the matching salary is like Otto Porter and 2 first-round picks. When Porzingis is traded, it's like DeAndre Jordan and Wesley Matthews as the matching contracts, and then Dennis Smith Jr. going into his second year and 2 first-round picks. Like, the Kings have ways to get other really good, talented players on this team. You just have to be willing to trade first-round picks. So if they're willing to do that, which I think at some point you need to try, then I think that they can, yeah.
Great stuff as always, Brenden. You know we're big fans, man. Thanks for jumping on with us.
Appreciate you having me on.
HBK, appreciate you, man.